And Brent, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Andrea. So, yeah, we're going to try to take you behind the curtain of how successful IDSS can be, I suppose. And this will focus on a week of about a year ago today, actually, is roughly 51 weeks ago, of our busiest IDSS for on-site support week of the year. Covers both the Minnesota State Fair and often University of Minnesota football games as well. So please step forward. I'll kind of start us up and then hand it over to Nick. Yes, that being said.
Yes. Yeah, and as Brent said, we'll be jumping right into State Fair support tomorrow. I believe Brent is even our first person, so really convenient having this time come out. But before we dive into too much about what happened with this particular event, let's kind of do set a bit of a groundwork here about IDSS, specifically at our office here. So what does IDSS look like here at MPX? Well, we're at our 10-year anniversary of starting IDSS support. I started in 2015, where we started doing remote IDSS support here at MPX. And then we're talking about on-site support. We first did that with the University of Minnesota at then TCF Bank, now Huntington Bank Stadium, in 2017 with events at the University of Minnesota. That year started with because our Major League Soccer team, Minnesota United, started playing there, and that added demand made the University of Minnesota partially reach out to us. And we've been doing all kinds of events there since, even including when they have concerts. Moving forward now into this year, what are we doing currently in this year for DSS support? On average, we're having about 5 to 10 events on a weekday, a little bit larger on weekends and Fridays, about 10 to 20 events. And then some of the bigger days, especially over holiday weekends like the 4th of July, Memorial Day, you can start seeing 20 plus events, sometimes approaching upwards near 30 or so. So we got a lot of events going on here, and we're still very focused with our on-site support though on Minnesota State Fair and University of Minnesota. And that Minnesota State Fair support started in 2021 with the first State Fair that happened after the end of the COVID-19 pandemic.
And we do have additional on-site events. Usually we get a few air shows, and that level of on-site is kind of a mixture usually of DSS and outreach. So in the course of the summer, we're pretty busy.
So not everyone is going to be familiar with the Great Minnesota Get Together, so we wanted to throw this slide in here to give you people a rough idea about what's going on with the Minnesota State Fair. So first thing we really want to point out here is the total attendance of the State Fair is roughly right around 2 million people. Minnesota State at 5.7 million. Not going to say that it's only Minnesotans going to the State Fair. I know there's definitely people that are from Minnesota that no longer live here that come back specifically for the State Fair, but that's still a rather impressive number. Even more impressive, honestly, is the average daily attendance. The attendance on the cold, quieter days, which often tend to be colder or wetter or some kind of weather-related aspect, still usually pulling in like 100,000 people. And then the busier days are pulling in like 250. I think the daily record attendance is up around like 280,000 people that showed up on that day. This takes place across a 12-day span that every year ends in Labor Day. And because of these attendance numbers over this 12-day span, this makes it the largest state fair in the United States by daily average attendance. It is the second largest by total attendance behind Texas, but Texas goes for an entire month. So we get that number by average daily attendance, which is usually what's more important when you're talking about how we're going to be supporting an event with the National Weather Service. Also, since we are the Department of Commerce, and our mission is to support not just life, but property to enhance the national economy, what economic impact Minnesota State Fair does. This is a 12-day period that in 2018 generated almost over $250 million for the local Twin Cities economy and had impacts across the broader Midwest. So this is a pretty important event. And the last thing I really want to cover is where is this located? We have downtown St. Paul here. We have our MSP airport down here. St. Paul airport's right here. So we'll talk about the airports a little bit later as far as like where wind gusts are reported. So MSP's down here and St. Paul's right there, just for a reference. And then downtown Minneapolis. So the fairgrounds is right on the border of the two cities. The two cities have been historic rivals, and when they had to pick the fairgrounds, they basically put it on the border because they would fight over it otherwise. This is a small little community called Falcon Heights right here that's carved out of St. Paul because they couldn't let St. Paul have the fairgrounds. So they behave better now than they did 100 years ago, but just a little bit of it now. And this is an area of about 332 acres that is very prone to flash flooding, right in a very urban environment with very dense populations, and it's a very sensitive population to all kinds of heat, heavy rainfall, and general severe weather hazards. So also we realize this audience, not everyone's been on site, so just going to do some basic, what is the difference between being on site for DSS versus doing, regular from the office support. Starting over here, the primary difference is you're located directly eye to eye with that partner, as Ken Graham likes to say a lot with his NWS transformation. We then are able to tailor our forecast briefings and support directly to the need of the partner we're talking about. This is what happens with on-site support. This is what happens if you go to CWSU. You're directly talking to that partner, and they can give you direct feedback in real time about what you're giving them, and you can customize it even more for what they need. The continued evolution of probabilistic messaging that we've had within IDSS packets continues in on-site support, and you'll continue to use that, especially because they have key thresholds, and you can give them the probability of their key threshold being exceeded. But eventually you do get to a point, especially within like an hour or two before the actual event is occurring, where they need to make a deterministic decision, and they're going to start to want a little bit more deterministic data and kind of ask you to, more or less take your shot. What do you think is going to happen? I really need to make a decision here. Next, communication is key. Now, communication is key not just with the partners you're working with directly on site, but also back with your home WFO and any other WFOs that support you via mutual aid. That communication shows you are not alone, and as we do often within operations every single day within the agency, working together as a team to get that better forecast out there. Because in the end, what we're trying to do here is decision makers are making decisions based upon what we are giving them. And the most important thing that we give them is timing. Specifically with these two events, we're talking 60-minute minimum time to evacuate some of the rides, like the Ferris wheel and the Sky Ride, because they are relatively slow-moving rides, and to get everybody off, they need that kind of lead time. Otherwise, there could be somebody still stuck in that ride when the storms arrive, and that is a safety risk that they do not want to have to deal with. Going to the stadium, it kind of depends on how much of a sellout crowd it is to determine how much time it takes to evacuate. But they have some nearby buildings at like Williams Arena and Mariucci, for example, that are their evacuation sites because they do not have safe places inside the stadium for a sellout crowd to be present. And while it is important to be there on all kinds of weather, days that have busy weather is where you're going to get additional scrutiny on your forecast, especially if for University of Minnesota, it's going to impact the start time of a game, or for the State Fair, if it's going to impact the grandstand show. Because the State Fair is a pretty jam-packed schedule. Each concert has one time to go, and if they can't do it, it is canceled, and they have to refund all the tickets. There is no redos. It is not like other events where they can reschedule it. If this doesn't happen, it's done. That is lost. That is an entire lost event for the State Fair. And yeah, that's pretty much all we had to do. Anything you want to add on this slide, Brent, before we move on?
Oh, no, I think covered it pretty well.
All right. So just going to do a quick overview of State Fair support and university support before we move on to talk more about the actual DSS itself. So at the State Fair, we have NWS personnel that are going to be there from 8:30 a.m. to 9:30 p.m. each day. There will always be at least one on-site meteorologist there. We may flex up to having more than one if we're expecting particularly busy weather. Because when we're talking about the Minnesota State Fair EOC, you're not like in a small little trailer on the side. This is a large building that is, you can kind of see the size of our room here. It's probably about 3 or 4 times the size of the room we're at with our typical NWS conference room. And that room can have anywhere from early in the morning, like, 5 to 10 people in it, to like during a busy shift, which last year we had one really big one because we had the Secret Service show up because we had one of the vice president's nominees present at the time, and you can get like 35, 40 people in there at a time. And that's why you need to sometimes have 2 people there. Is if you have a small group of like 5, 10 people, one man can talk to them. You got a group of 40 people that are talking to you. They are EOCs, they should be following the instant command system, but there's still going to be people in around that come up and ask you questions. So in addition to all that, we have 2 daily set EOC briefings that take place, one between like 10 and 10:30, and the other one at 3 o'clock. The earlier one is more just for the EOC, the immediate people in there, and the 3 o'clock one is an entire operations briefing that bring people in from across the State Fair operations. The packets that you create, though, are also uploaded onto the EOC SAD, which is primarily focused on all kinds of cameras. They have hundreds of cameras across the State Fair. There's really no place that has secrecy in that place. They know what's going on. And then if there is impactful weather, they will take you to the grandstand on site behind the stage to give a briefing at 4 o'clock to the people that run the grandstand, and sometimes even the artists themselves will show up to that to hear what's going on with the weather. So that can be I've gotten to do that one time, and the artist didn't show up for it, but there was a very large audience there about everyone who was running it. And then basically your job there is weather watch. So keep an eye on radar, satellite, any social media, keeping up to date on your model trends, and also talking back to the local office. Looking at the university support, you have one NWS personnel assigned to each of the individual games throughout the home games at the Go football events, and you will always do a weather briefing the day before. If you give a blue sky forecast, that is the only briefing you will do till you show up on site. But if there is a busy forecast like there was for this event we'll be talking about, they will schedule additional briefings. On-site support will start sometime between 1 and 3 hours before kickoff, depending on the weather. The more busy the weather, the more likely they're going to want you there further ahead of time, because one of the big things they do is called the 100-minute meeting. This is probably common, I think, across other Big Ten schools. So anyone else in here who has a Big Ten school that they support may be familiar with this. It is a meeting that happens 100 minutes before the start of the game, where you have Big Ten officials like the referees, both teams' coaches, people from the TV network that's going to be covering the game, and all the various different support staff at the stadium, and sometimes even higher to the university, like the university president, may show up to hear about how the game is going to be put together, and you, as the weather forecast, the day where the weather is going to be impactful. Same kind of weather watch. Main change from the State Fair is much more attention is paid to lightning, because lightning is in specific rules for Gopher football and for many other NCAA events where you need to have a certain time range within the radius of the stadium when lightning has ceased before they can resume play. And one little extra thing to put in here is across different times I've supported busy Gopher events, I've had the chief of police sitting behind me the entire time doing the forecast. And another time I had the university president come in and ask for an update on the forecast. So you get direct impact from the highest levels of the partner. So this is what our emails look like for our morning emails that we send out to all of our DSS events. One benefit we get from the Minnesota State Fair is it is such a large event that typically other events do not like to compete with it. So our DSS load gets a little bit less as we go near the State Fair. So you can see on this event here, we had 5 DSS events this day, which kind of helped us focus in a little bit more and provide a little more granular, detailed forecast than we could do versus some of those days we have like 20 events and we're trying to provide one of these DSS one-pagers. We typically do these one-pages because a lot of our partners told us they like to have something printed out to bring with them and kind of have with them as they do things, to have in addition to their point forecast that we update throughout the day. Now, on site for the State Fair, we provide some additional briefings that we mentioned earlier. These, if you're familiar with the old sit reps we used to do before DSS package for a thing, they are based on those. They have that color-coded headline at the top to immediately draw your attention to a similar kind of operations level type environment. They have a just simple breakdown of what's going to happen each day with a very clear, plain language description, so they can kind of get an idea of what's coming up, because emergency management, after all, is about being prepared for what's coming. And on future pages, which we'll talk about more, there's a forecast matrix and then just additional pages where you can add whatever graphics to the forecast discretion. Like you could add an SBC map, for an example, or any other additional details like that. And these will be updated during those 2 briefing times a day, although you could get an additional update requested by EOC management. This is what the matrix looks like. Similar setup. You got your forecast coding, goes from green, blue sky type weather, yellow to impacts but low impacts. Then you can start using reds for high impacts and purples for very high impacts as kind of the general evolution of the colors on that. And this is what you work forward with. So I will move this on to Brent so we can talk about our first event.
All right, thank you, Nick. So it was a really active week for weather. It's probably our busiest stretch of the summer last year, if you just remove the DSS support. So we had a really nice upper level ridge kind of set up just to our south, and we were on that northern periphery. And when you start getting those ridge riders at the this time of year, you have a lot of instability, enough shear to get some trouble, and that's kind of what we saw here. So we had kind of a train of various MCSs between the 26th, 27th, and 29th. Our office provides critical on-site IDSS support to our emergency management decision makers at both the State Fair and university, as Nick mentioned. And that is to, again, help them make those critical real-time public safety decisions, making sure that everyone gets to go home unharmed. I got the mouse now. So I'm going to start off with event 1, and that focus is more like a 1A, 1B. So bear with me. Very hot and humid air mass. You had tropical dew points. With that evapotranspiration, we saw values in the upper 70s and even a few 80s along the I-90 and Iowa border. So when you have temperatures in the low 90s ahead of that, you have a lot of instability. Most of the time you're capped, but when you get, again, a little shortwave coming in, usually you get enough upper level forcing or forcing to break the cap and lead to a lot of, explosive severe weather, as we like to say, across the upper Mississippi Valley. That Monday afternoon on the 26th, initial supercells did develop across western Minnesota early to mid-afternoon. Those are about 2 to 3 hours earlier than any of the high-res guidance had, and that was, again, I'll tie that into the forecast decisions I made later that day. These cells would quickly grow upscale and congeal into an MCS that would cause wind damage from central Minnesota through the Twin Cities metro and into western Wisconsin. A second round of severe thunderstorms developed late Monday night or early Tuesday morning, and that would cause additional wind damage in eastern Minnesota, Twin Cities, and western Wisconsin. So surface analysis here from 21Z and Monday, you can see a lot of moisture being pulled here, and then that surface frontal feature. And even behind the front, notice that there's not a steep drop off with the surface dew point values until you get up here towards Grand Forks area. So that's going to play a key role for that 1B scenario. Event 1, 21Z balloon launch from our office here. You can see pretty great environment for severe weather. I mean, you don't really have much of a cap, which was kind of the canary in the coal mine for the on-site forecast to say, hey, stuff's going to go up a little bit earlier today. Precipitable water over 2 inches. Shear was It did improve as that the initial convection moved closer. So really, though, what stands out is even though we were hot and humid, you still have a pretty good decape with 1,300 joules, enough effective shear to maintain severe convection. And really, there's not much capping left as of 21Z. So it was a pretty well forecast event. The issue was timing. And this is a 0Z HRF paintball plot from the evening before, and it really shows you just the spread of timing we were dealing with. And the 12Z one we had looked very similar to this. So we had high confidence there would likely be initial supercells turning into an MCS. It's just, would they move through at 0Z or 6Z Tuesday? So, that's really where the on-site meteorologist has to start digging into the meteorology behind it and double down and figure out what the cams are trying to put out there, because they're not gospel, right? And I'm gonna let the radar loop here, and you can kind of see there was a watch out, and that you can see our supercells would congeal here. Time-wise, this is early evening to mid-evening, kind of at the tail end of our evening rush, 6:30 to 7:30. You can see a lot of reports as we moved into the metro. They did drop off, and then they kind of picked up again there on the backside. But really, when we're looking at, say, our SPC outlook, verification-wise, I'd say they did a pretty good job. You can see the 2 corridors of focus on the western side and then the eastern side of the outlook. And this does include both rounds of thunderstorms for our office there. And notice just a lot of wind reports. I think we only had 1 or 2 hail. But when you're that warm and your melting layers 3-4 miles out, you're not going to get hail. Timeline-wise, let's put this all together. Let's kind of think of this person on site. I was fortunate enough to be that on-site support for the first round. I gave a briefing at 10 a.m. and at the end of it, the director of the EOC told me to kind of call my shot. I said, I'm going to lean a little earlier, and I said probably 6 to 7 p.m. or 7:30. Just kind of your peak grandstand show time. And I don't know if Nick kind of highlighted what a grandstand show is. It's usually kind of like your concert each night. There's 20,000 people in attendance usually just for the concert. So on the lower side, at least 10,000. It is a pretty big show, and you do get some pretty good names over the course of the 12 days. So that just adds additional kind of scrutiny, given that the grandstand area is more or less a bowl, and it fills up with water pretty quickly. So pre-event briefings, 10 and 3:15. I did stay over to support the 2 meteorologists that came in after for that afternoon support, just because we were getting a lot of questions. And fortunately, once that convection went up, things started to simmer down and people started make their decisions and go into their action plans. How to watch out for Hennepin and Ramsey at 5:15 p.m. First, SPS went out 6:48. 6 minutes later, we had a considerable tag, severe thunderstorm warning, and that is the one shown here. You can see we are always trying to be cognizant of where our events are, and for the state fair in particular, the WFO forecaster working radar had the foresight to kind of extend it out just to give that lead time, as you mentioned. You need at least an hour. Obviously, that is communicated on site, but this also just kind of reinforces it for the public.
Yeah, because it is very tempting. Hennepin County is where Minneapolis is, and Ramsey County is where St. Paul is, for those that aren't familiar with the area. So it is very tempting to just kind of have the warning end at the Hennepin Ramsey line and have another warning come later. So the forecaster here made the decision to kind of extend it a little bit into Ramsey County there to cover the fairgrounds to give them that extra notice.
And again, now second severe thunderstorm warning, 7:23, did include both counties again, and our storm threat wrapped up by 8:30. So, pretty impactful event, but we were fortunate this time around. Here's the watch graphic. You can see kind of focused through our Twin Cities metro. And again, you can see stuff congealing and the nice rear inflow jet here. I'd say estimated about 70 mile per hour winds in the Southwest metro at my house. So definitely an impactful storm. Again, the watching or SPS warning graphics. Again, considerable tag. And really, we got lucky with that one. The impacts directly, I think we measured a 49 mile per hour gust at the mesonet that is set up by Hennepin County at the fairgrounds. So let's move on to 1B, and that is early Tuesday morning on the 27th. High-res guidance and even global guidance began to pick this up 12Z that Monday, so the day before. That was the first thing I noticed when I was on site trying to get my situational awareness is, hey, look, it looks like we're going to see 2 rounds, but as a forecaster, that first round will probably be the more impactful one just because of the timing. But what we saw with that initial MCS left behind a pretty pristine environment. You still had dew points in the low 70s and enough instability to tap into for the second line. And really, these storms developed right after midnight over southwest Minnesota, moved through metro right after 9 to say 11Z Tuesday morning. And looking at this radar image here, you can kind of see the gust front out ahead of it. You're not really worried about it, but we always have a saying in this office, as stuff approaches the metro, you're going to get a severe thunderstorm gust at MSP. And storms like to kind of intensify over leading to the metro. And again, just a quick glimpse into what environment we're working with. You can kind of see that gradient there in the D cape at 9Z of the surface analysis from the SPC website. And the mu cape, you had a pretty good, most unstable cape. So there was definitely some cause for concern, especially as that stuff was moving out of southwest Minnesota into kind of eastern Minnesota. It's moving to a better environment. And sure enough, what do we see? You'll see here again on this radar loop, stuff really got its act together as it's moving through Carver County and then into the metro proper core of it. And you can see a lot of reports with this one as it moves through the core metro. A lot of reports. And again, it's moving through 4:30 to 6 a.m. A lot of people are sleeping, but the state fairgrounds always active. You have a lot of people camping. You have a lot of animals on site and just a lot of property that's set up there that people have a vested interest in. So just because our support on site ends doesn't mean the WFO support ends. The night crew here gave an initial heads up call late Monday evening, right around midnight or 1 a.m. just to say, hey, it looks like we'll see a increased confidence of that second round moving through pre-sunrise in the metro here. Initial SW or SPS was 4:45, but that was just line of thunderstorms. However, it did strengthen by 5 a.m. We had that first severe out, and that included Hennepin. The meteorologist here did call the EOC director and said, hey, the first warning is not including the state fair, but the impacts are increasingly likely, just to give them a heads up. And by 5:18, we had a 61 mile per hour gust at MSP Airport and a 64 mile per hour gust at St. Paul. And again, if you remember where those spots are, where Nick pointed out, the state fairgrounds kind of in between, but a few miles north. And well, by the time this ended at 6 a.m., we had a pretty widespread damage in the metro, including at the state fairgrounds. So Due to the nocturnal nature of this round, the pre-event briefing that I gave Monday was pretty solid. I did give them some heads up saying, hey, we're not gonna be done with this once this moves through Monday evening. It's not really gonna scour out that moisture. We're gonna probably see another line with that surface cold front. So they were aware of it. I did put a little more emphasis on that first round though. That overnight call from the WFO and multiple calls from the WFO really helped the EOC management on site. The EOC director mentioned that he took about a 90-minute nap between 2 and 3:30 before he got back to the EOC. And knowing the EOC directors, they're not kidding. And I think he may have exaggerated how long he actually slept. But it's very important to have someone on site to communicate with them, and if not, to have a relationship so when we're calling them, they know who they're talking to at the WFO. And this round of thunderstorms did produce a lot of widespread wind damage across the state fairgrounds. And this was the first time in Minnesota State Fair history that they had to delay the opening due to that damage. So it was delayed, I believe, 2 hours to 9 a.m. And when I was driving in that next morning on Tuesday morning, it was impressive to see the amount of tree branches down and, kind of minor, I'd say outbuilding type damage. A lot of it was just trees though, a lot of branches down. And fortunately, through these 2 rounds of severe weather, Monday evening and Tuesday morning, only 1 injury was reported, and that was not directly tied to the severe weather. There was an incident in one of the barns with the animals, so not directly tied to it, but that's why we're there. We're there to make sure that everyone has the best forecast possible to make sure that, whether it's property, animals, or people aren't going to get injured. And again, this is our success. No one wants to end up on the 5 or 10 o'clock news at the end of the day. And we were fortunate enough to avoid that this time around. Again, here's that second round. You can see the warnings there. And you can see what I can point out where that blue star is. That's where the state fairgrounds are. Our warning each time, we were the state fairgrounds was the center of that warning. And so looking at the local reports here, I do have that little zoomed in area at the bottom right here. And you can see a lot of these came from that second round and they went right through the core of the metro. That's what we like to see here, right? 4 million people plus, seeing all those wind reports really gets us up and going in the morning. But thankfully, again, no injuries directly tied to severe weather at the state fairgrounds. So I'm going to hand this off to Nick, and he's going to talk you through that Thursday event, or event 2.
So yeah, thankfully we did get a little bit of time off between the 2 events, although we had a very similar setup that came in as we moved into Thursday. So this event, as you can see with the SKUT we have here on the right, a very, honestly, fairly similar setup to what we were talking about earlier. You have maybe not quite as much of that inverted V setup as we had earlier on, but we do have a pretty good, pretty warm temperatures, not quite as warm, similar dew points, and once again, not a whole lot of a cap going on here. So when storms did bubble up, they bubbled up fast. Once again, looking at like 4,000 plus joules a cave, really high supercell. The main difference on this one, though, is how at the time of the sounding, we already had some pretty impressive SRH going on with this one. So once again, good synoptic support, shortwave trough, surface cold front, everything to get things started. We had all the ingredients for storms. We had the moisture, we had the lift, we had the instability, we had the shear. Really slam dunk, really not a whole lot of doubt that we were expecting anything to happen as things came into the upper Mississippi Valley. So once again, showing SBC, another good forecast for SBC. This was a very strong week for them where they provided a lot of great support to us, the WFO level. You can see all the reports pretty well clustered here inside the enhanced risk and that highest wind risk. And also all the reports are largely wind, although we did have a couple low wind, I believe EF0 tornadoes that happened with this as well.
And EF0s.
Looking at the HREF paintball plots like before, you can see once again, high confidence across HREF membership of some kind of convective line making their way through. And the benefit we had for this one versus what happened on Monday of this particular week is they're a lot closer together. There's still some spread, still some uncertainty in the timing, but this was showing a little bit tighter timing to help us out with some of our timing estimates we had to make to both our partners at, for this day, not just the Minnesota State Fair, but a University of Minnesota's kickoff game against the University of North Carolina. So here's what the radar loop looks like. We have both U of M and the State Fairgrounds on different colors here, using kind of the colors associated with those events. U of M's got their gold color, and State Fairgrounds with one of their shades of blue they use. So you can see as we're getting around to about 4:15 here, 4:25, we're getting near and around the downtown area of Minneapolis and where both the events are. And by the time we're getting closer to 5 o'clock, they have passed by the event. Although specifically with regards to the University of Minnesota, they are very lightning sensitive, and this trailing stratiform rain did have occasional lightning strikes persisting with it that did continue all the way until a little bit after 7 o'clock, which really made it such that they were very happy that about what kind of timing they could get with this. So here's the support that worked out between the two different events here. University of Minnesota, we'll start with that one. We always provide, as we said at the start of the presentation, a day before weather briefing. Since we were talking about what's going to be happening on this, they did schedule an additional meeting for us where they asked us to be at the campus operations meeting the following morning. This is the operations meeting for the entire University of Minnesota Twin Cities campus, which is the campus of about 50,000 students. So pretty big deal on that one. They wanted us to be on there because they thought the impact was campus-wide rather than just associated with the game. There was an additional briefing scheduled during the ops meeting for 3 o'clock because the game time was scheduled for 7 p.m. They wanted to have that 4 hours before game time. And on-site support started as soon as possible after that. It took me about an hour with the traffic due to road construction, which we're all kind of in a Midwestern part of the country. We know there's 2 seasons, road construction and winter. So it was road construction season. It took about an hour to get down there. I was the one doing the support for that day at the University of Minnesota. So that's about what it took me. At the State Fair, their weather briefings provided the day before, talking about the possible impact of another round of storms happening, as well as another round of hot, humid air. Storm timings were provided specifically by the evening shift that Wednesday. I happened to be the evening shift, so I went from State Fair support in the evening to University of Minnesota the next day. I actually provided one of my University of Minnesota briefings from the State Fair EOC, so that was kind of fun. But, you know, bouncing up, that's some of the challenges you have when you have 2 events back-to-back like this. And I had to, once again, because partially of the support that was provided by Brent and others earlier in the week, they asked me, we know you guys further out don't like to really narrow it down, but if you had to take a guess when these storms are going to happen, they asked me, what hour do you think is going to happen? And based on what I saw with the cams and the evolution of the pattern, I said 4 to 5 p.m. I think that was some luck, but there's also some forecast skill on that. That just seemed to be the most likely hour, and I kind of had to take a pick between. There was a 3-hour period I was pretty confident in, and I just kind of went for the central one, and fortunately it worked out, and they were once again pretty happy with us. And further updates continued on Thursday during the day shift and especially the evening briefing because the storms were already ongoing at that point. So the first briefing with the University of Minnesota, all these calls happen via Zoom. This one is attended by basically everyone we consider to be core partners, emergency management, medical, law enforcement, all the people that are really related to the core public safety mission were present there. Their concern was related to severe wind and hail damage and, of course, lightning because of NCAA rules with regards to lightning cannot be happening while the student athletes are on the field. So timing was the main focus of the questions, and with various things I gave them, including looking at things like the HREF, which I have one of the paintball plots here, which is set for game time, which was at 7 p.m. or 0 UTC. You can see there's plenty of activity shown to be around the fairgrounds, so additional briefings were scheduled. The university-wide briefing, the campus operations meeting, provided another forecast there with updated forecast timing. At this point, we started to hone in more on expecting that to be either at the later window, we were thinking there could be like a 6 to 7 p.m. arrival, or in the earlier window of 4 to 5. The earlier window ended up winning, but both were impactful for them because they do have pregame events in tailgating the hours beforehand. One tool that we used heavily with this was DESI, which we'll go to this slide here and see what this is the exact DESI image that I utilized with it, utilizing a just kind of probabilistic confidence of what they think the radar is. So this did take a little bit of explaining. It's not just a straight up radar timing. I have to tell them more along the lines of, as you see the brighter colors show up, that's where you're starting to expect. It's being kind of weird here and not showing the full animation, but you can see, you probably have worked with DESI before and you have an idea of what it's doing here and showing the kind of information to them to let them know of, more so since their question were timing, and it shows them that pre-game time is at risk. So we do end up issuing a severe thunderstorm watch, and it's always fun when SPC specifically calls out your major metro area in the text of their watch. And in their imagery here, where they say damaging wind threat will approach the Twin Cities. And increasing low level rotation is also present, which ended up playing out because we did get a couple weak tornadoes from that event as well.
10.
Exactly. So the final remote briefing happened at 3 o'clock as the watch was already out, the storms were out, severe thunderstorm warnings were out. So I had the rare occasion where I was able to simply just take a time of arrival and tell them the storm will hit at exactly this time. And based upon that, they made the decision to delay the kickoff from the 7 p.m. Start time to the 8 p.m. because even though I had told them that the main line of the storm would have been passed before kickoff started, lightning was likely to continue after the main line passed through. And with that decision, they decided to kick things off and cancel all the pregame. So everything that right down here, this is literally just a screen cap from the Go for Football website and what they provided to all of their fans to let them know we're kicking things back and we're not going to get start on time, and all the pregame activities have been canceled as well for the purposes of public safety. So a direct decision was made based upon our briefing right here at 3 o'clock. So here are the warnings that were issued for this. We have both U of M and the State Fair showed side by side here. One is just next to downtown Minneapolis, the other one's just barely across on the other side of the Minneapolis border. Both of them 60-mile-per-hour wind warnings with hail not really a threat. So here's the timeline of the university support. So we have those 3 different weather briefings that happened: the main weather briefing the day before, the campus operations meeting, and then the weather briefing as storms were happening. They immediately started the EOC as soon as that briefing ended. It took me, as I said, about an hour to get there. A severe thunderstorm warning was issued during my drive to the University of Minnesota campus. And I unfortunately did not get into the stadium before the rain hit. And it's always fun when your meteorologist shows up soaked all the way through and they're closed because they did not get in time thanks to 35W traffic during rush hour and construction season. State Fair supports, once again, we had the morning briefing, the afternoon briefing, and the watch was issued. You can see the timing on there as well as severe thunderstorm. Plenty of notices given. The main thing I want to point out here is this right here. This is in Ramsey County, as we brought it before. Ramsey County, the RCCC, the Ramsey County Crisis Communication Center, I don't know the exact acronym, but they have the ability to issue WIAs for specific geographic areas, and they had a geotagged area only for the state fairgrounds where they could issue a WIA alert to let just the people in the fairgrounds know that there was a severe thunderstorm coming. They did have a bit of a challenge with doing that at this point because they had to talk to St. Paul to get it out. So a change they made for this year because of what happened with this event is they're now going to have somebody that can issue it directly from the EOC this year. Hopefully we don't need it, but if we do need it, they will have a lot less trouble at sending out those WIA alerts for any reason, from weather to any other kind of emergency message that they wish to send from the Emergency Operations Center. So university operations, once you're on site, you can see this is what I came into when I got to the stadium. You can see they're showing our weather service radar website. So they had that up on the screen for everyone to see, directly giving us that rep right there. And the lightning had already been occurring by the time I arrived on site. So the timing that I was giving them on site was more, when is this going to end? And it's always kind of anyone who's been at one of these football events during a thunderstorm, you're pretty high up in the press box and you can just see the lightning in the distance ringing out all over the place. So giving them an idea when that's going to be. So that was the main thing that I provided in that 100-minute briefing that I was talking about, and with the updates that were provided through the EM. With this event, lightning forecasting was not as complicated as it could be because it simply was as soon as the back edge of the storm moved out and we no longer had the kind of trailing stratiform region, the lightning came to an end. So it was pretty much a time of arrival tool to figure out when things ended. And we're able to pretty much nail, the time I gave them was only off by 6 minutes for when I told them the last lightning strike would happen. And we got a really nice situation where they directly relayed that to everyone, including the president of the University of Minnesota. And the president came down once the game started and said, "You guys really nailed when that last lightning strike would be. How'd you pull it off?" And they directly said, "Thank the National Weather Service." So that's the kind of thing you get, and you really get that. That's what's special about on-site support, seeing that direct impact of the work you're doing and the way you're helping, and just that direct feedback is just something you cannot get from other situations. And we also were the ones determining in the EOC up there when that last strike happened, and we used the Visala lightning detector network, the NLDN, to determine when that last strike occurred. So local storm reports, not quite as widespread with this one. We're fairly fortunate that the storms did seem to be on a weakening trend as they approached the Twin Cities. So for the Gopher football game, at least, that ended up being a lot more of the lightning impact. And there was enough wind with it still that we did exceed a lot of the State Fair thresholds for having to get people off of the rides, even if they did not have the kind of damage that they had from the morning of the 27th. It still ended up being an impact, significant impact to both events, even if the severe reports weren't as extensive as they had been earlier in the week. Most of the damage and impacts ended up being more in the just north of the Twin Cities metro, where you see more of those wind and tornado reports. So with that, we're just going to wrap things up here with some conclusions and takeaways, and I'll pass it over to Brent for some of our first ones.
Yeah, and I'm going to go off the slide for a second, but we did leave out a few key pieces of information just for the sake of time. That Monday that I was on site, that was our first event, also coincided with that excessive heat warning we had out. Our heat indices were in the low to mid 100s, which also coincided with Senior Day at the State Fair. So that was some great decision making there. They did move in additional cooling centers ahead of time to support that, and again, didn't have any heat illnesses that were treatable. So a lot of variables there outside of just the severe weather. And I'd also like to give a shout out to a few other offices in our upper Mississippi subregion group. We do get additional forecaster support from Duluth and La Crosse. They usually send someone down to help on-site support with us, as well as NCRFC. They've had a couple of folks support the State Fair with us as well. So kudos to all of the offices I mentioned for the additional support. It really does help out and really makes a big impact for when we're communicating with our partners. So, and that's our first point. Communication is key for both the on-site meteorologist, with the office, and with your partners. The deeper we get into doing on-site support, specifically with the State Fair and the university, the more we see that our relationship with the partner and that communication, the comfort between people is really important. And they put trust in your words and the forecast information we're giving them. So we're not looking at NBM when we're on site. We're doing actual meteorology and trying to figure things out so they can make their decision, and hopefully it works out. This time it did. The next is kind of the extra challenge with the 29th. We had 2 on-site events we were supporting. So again, you can kind of see with staffing how it can get strained, because you also have to still staff the WFO and
during severe weather
operations. It gets busy. And again, also I would like to throw in a kudos to the CWSU ZMP. I know they deal with additional traffic, at least into MSP, some of the restrictions that are put in place for State Fair Week. So a lot of kudos to our subregion folks and our neighboring offices that help us out. Key actions that were taken by both the university and State Fair were based directly on our DSS, which is huge. Nick alluded to it, the university president kind of thanking him. When we showed up Tuesday morning, I had one of our NCRFC hydrologists with me and one of our newer meteorologists as a training shift, so they can kind of feel things out for when they will be on site next year or this year or whenever. And when we walked into the EOC at the State Fair, everyone immediately turned and gave us a round of applause. And you don't always get that gratification, but I joked with the EOC director. It's like, on the flip side, if we were wrong, we would have been the opposite reaction. He's like, no, we understand that, it's difficult, and we got to celebrate our successes. And even the St. Paul police chief gave us little medallion coins at one of the morning stand-up briefings they do at the EOC as a signal of appreciation for that support. So that's really why we're there, right? We're there to give important weather information to our decision makers, so that at the end of the day, people find a way to shelter and no injuries, no property damage or minimal property damage. Everyone can get to go home happy and healthy to their families, and no one's ending up on the 10 o'clock news. That's a big point. Again, probabilistic data nowadays is kind of taking over everything that we do forecast-wise, and it is helpful, very helpful. You can integrate that in even when you're giving a more deterministic point forecast at the State Fair EOC, at the University of Minnesota EOC, wherever you're at, you can still integrate that, and should integrate that, even if it's a more deterministic point forecast. That really helps the event managers make their decision, and it can really kind of show, maybe you have 2 groups. You have maybe 70% in this outcome and 30% in this outcome.
So this outcome is the favored outcome, but we can't completely ignore that outcome, right? And I'll hand it back to Nick for the last 3 bullet points.
Sure, yeah, and with all this, lead time is the most important. So when we're usually, at least for when we've done on-site DSS events here at this office, it's primarily been an event where there's a large population of people that are expecting to be outside. And so lead time is typically going to be, what is the time to shelter? So that's always an event you need to know about before the deployment. What is your threshold you need to know at? What is the time? How long it's going to take people to be at shelter, and you can use that to help figure out when you're going to be letting them know something is about to happen. The more lead time, the better, but that critical threshold when you know you have in the hot seat and you need help to make a decision, knowing that and them knowing that you know that makes their job so much easier, and that knowing that you can be thinking about that and helping them out with that. In the end, the decision is theirs. We don't make the decision, but we provide them that support to make that decision. After all, what does DSS stand for? Decision Support Services. In addition, you need to know about the other thresholds. For the state fair, for example, you need to know about what wind speeds do they stop using the Ferris wheel, what wind speeds does the skyride go down, what are the temperatures at which they need to start deploying extra cooling stations. All those thresholds you want to know, and what radius do they need to know about lightning. That's all the kind of stuff you should know about before your deployment, because if you're having to learn about it while you're on deployment, you're probably not going to deliver the kind of service that is going to make your partners happy and make them want to invite you back and be part of their continued mission.
Yeah, and I guess I'll take the last bullet point here and kind of put it together. When you're doing this, you got to consider the size of the EOC and the need of the event when planning staffing. We said this is a cumulative effect. We're always integrating what we learned the year prior into how to improve our IDSS, specifically on site. And one of those things was they moved into a new EOC for the state fair, and it was larger, so there's more partners there. And you know, we for the first time last year, we put out the state fair shifts, on-site shifts for our peak leave back in March. So that's on the schedule 5-6 months ahead of time. So we know what staffing is accounted for during that kind of peak DSS season support. And furthermore, building that relationship. We took a tour ahead of time just to know where the lay of the land is. Because again, like Nick alluded to, if you're going to these places sight unseen for the first time and there's severe weather or even just excessive heat or 30-mile-per-hour winds, 25-mile-per-hour winds, and you're trying to make those decisions and you're not familiar with the place you're at or the people you're talking to, that can lead to a decrease of effectiveness in communication and messaging, and you don't want to drop the ball. So we always try to get the forecasters who haven't been there to do a kind of a lay of the land type of meeting ahead of time with the EOC director.
Or a training shift.
Yeah, we'll always
better.
do a training shift too. But the more experience you get with where you're at, the more familiar you'll be. And again, it all just leads to a better experience for the on-site forecaster and our partners. So
with that, we do want to thank everyone who contributed, everyone here at NPX that helped provide to the forecast, everyone who was on site, issued warnings, did regular products, and various help across the upper Mississippi Valley, especially Duluth and La Crosse for the help they provided. I just really want to single out Joe Struce, who's in the back right here. He helped us out a lot with putting part of these slides together, as he was our partner when we presented an earlier version of this during our spring workshop. And at this time, if there's any questions, we can take them. Thank you for your time this morning.
Hey, thank you guys again for presenting here. We can give it a couple minutes for questions. We do have the Q&A section. You can throw a question in the chat or just raise your hand, good old-fashioned way. So we'll give it a minute just for a couple questions.
you want to stop presenting? I think that way I can do the chat. Yeah, cool. All right.
Well, not seeing any questions, but these guys are available if anything comes to mind. So we'll go ahead and wrap it up. This recording should be available in a couple of days, and it should be posted on the CRH Science Google Sites page under the Innovation Spotlight subsection. So keep an eye out for that. Thanks again, Brent and Nick, for presenting today. And thank you everyone else for attending. We will see you next time.
Thank you. We appreciate it.